Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg, and today we are talking about a very special topic. When we speak or write about spirituality, the word itself seems to evoke many shades of meaning. Ask a group of people what the word means to them, and you'll receive several different answers. For some, spirituality means a connection to God. For others, the word implies a connection to some force greater than ourselves, the universe, nature, or just our surroundings. Just as something in essence that underlies that definition of what one's sense of self is. My guest today is Rabbi Dr. Jason Weiner. He's the senior rabbi and director of the spiritual care department at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He's responsible for the chaplaincy team and all spiritual aspect of one's care while being treated at the hospital. His new book is Care and Covenant from Georgetown University Press. It's out now, and he's also the author of Jewish Guide to Practical Medical Decision-Making and Guide to Observance of Jewish Law in a Hospital. Rabbi Dr. Weiner has published more than 24 scholarly articles and book chapters, as well as several popular pieces. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Honored to be with you.
And just on a personal note, I'm so thrilled to have you here because the two times my husband was in the hospital, you came to visit and it was very, very helpful. So I appreciate that. And he's well and happy now. So
glad to hear.
It's a great, successful outcome. Yes. How did you come to specialize in the art and science of being a rabbi and bioethicist?
Well, it wasn't the plan. It wasn't like the trajectory that I was on or my intention. I sort of fell into it, but also fell in love with it. I was assistant rabbi at a synagogue in Los Angeles, Young Israel Century City, and Rabbi Levi Meir of blessed memory, who had been the rabbi here at Cedars-Sinai for 30 years, was a member of our synagogue. And when he was unfortunately not doing well, my boss, Rabbi Muskin, our head rabbi, kind of offered that I could help him out a little bit. And so that ended up being 2 years that I was just trying to fill in and help him out while he was dealing with his recovery, which unfortunately he didn't recover from. And then eventually, after he passed away, I ended up coming here full time to work in the hospital. And I saw that, there's so much, technology and innovation and struggling and suffering and there's so much to learn and to absorb that I really wanted to be able to help people. So I felt that I'm going to have to really focus and dig in and educate myself. And so at first I was reading a lot. I did clinical pastoral education, like kind of the chaplaincy training. And then I wanted to be as good of a resource as I could be to the patients. So I did a master's in health policy and then a doctorate in clinical bioethics, because I felt that it helped me, to be the best advocate and the best resource that I could be for the patients.
Was that a learn as you go, seat of your pants kind of thing? You had to be working and going to school, or did you step away and do your education?
I was learning and going to school. And oftentimes as issues would come up and things that I hadn't anticipated, I'd realize, I have to learn about this. I have to educate myself. Sometimes I'd have one experience and then I'd read 3 books as a result of that one experience, because I realized there was more to learn.
It's a bottomless pit. You'll never stop learning,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
Right. Hopefully not.
Yeah. Rabbi Weiner, as a spiritual advisor, your role in healthcare is priceless, to a person facing a health crisis, because the first place most people go is fear, and they become immobilized by that fear and maybe not as clear about making decisions because they're terrified. I'm sure this is very taxing on you to, talk someone down from that. So what are the steps you take in calming someone down enough to be receptive to not only your help, but medical help as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. The steps that I take are, first of all, being a good listener, being a real, non-anxious, non-judgmental presence. I find that oftentimes, there are people that want to talk and they want to open up, but they have to be given space to open up. Sometimes someone could come in the room and say, I came to wish you well, and it looks like you're good. Okay, good. Have a good day. Bye. And the patient's like, well, I would have loved to talk to them. They would have just sat down and listened to me. But it takes a little bit of coaxing sometimes. It's not our natural state to really open up about our deepest, darkest, emotions and fears. But we often want to. We want someone who's a good listener, who's there to listen and focus on us. And so the first step is really showing people, demonstrating both by our body language, by sitting down, by not looking like we're kind of facing towards the door or trying to get out of there, and also by our words, by telling them, I'm here to listen, I'm here for you, asking open-ended questions, just probing a little bit to try to see if they want to talk. And often that leads to kind of the second strategy, which is sort of both in the desire to show people that we're here to listen. We also model that a non-anxious presence can also kind of model a calmness.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, if I walk into a patient's room and I'm very anxious and I'm excited or I'm aggressive, or they might model my behavior and reflect the same emotions. But if I can be calm and compassionate and relaxed, sometimes it can help the person, especially in the way that I talk, the way that I ask the questions, can kind of change the atmosphere in the room and help things to calm down, as long as it's also including, of course, empathy and recognizing what's going on. They're in charge, they're leading, I'm going where they want to lead the conversation.
Now, what's interesting to me is that we all have different beliefs. And even within those beliefs, some are stronger than others. And also there's a lot of mock locus, and I'll explain that the definition of that, sort of maybe an argument or a way of looking at things that doesn't always jive with your own religion, never mind others. So I'm curious, do you and all of your colleagues get trained in the laws and the beliefs and the dynamics of the different faiths so that you can all chip in? Or
yeah. That's a great question. So we don't, and that's intentionally not. So on the one hand, we are obviously exposed to each other. So a few feet away from my office is a Catholic priest and a Christian minister, and we have Muslim chaplains and Buddhists, and we're interacting and learning from each other and talking to each other, and meeting the patient. So obviously there is some learning that happens, but our focus, at least here at Cedars-Sinai, it might be different in some places, but we think that this is important as a Jewish hospital, is providing same, we call it in religion care, okay. Co-religionist. So a Jewish patient is going to get a Jewish chaplain, just like a Catholic patient will get a Catholic chaplain. Okay. And even when there are those times when, let's say, there's an emergency or in the middle of the night or in the emergency room, there are some times when a chaplain is needed, and it's not of the same religion. Our focus is not to try to know everything about another religion, because you can't know everything. Right. It's too nuanced, it's too details. Every individual is unique. And so the goal is to be there for them, to listen, to be a good listener, let them teach us what they need, and to focus on, there's broader things besides for specific ritual support that we can provide. So I'm not going to go to a Catholic patient's room and pretend like I know all the details of Catholic theology and Catholic practice, but I can be a good listener to them. I can be a compassionate presence. We have some overlap. It might be, let's say, Psalms or something like that we can kind of relate to. But I have to be authentic of who I am. And there's a lot of risk in trying to be who I'm not.
Yeah, I just was I was curious about like the emergency situations, or someone really needs someone. That's interesting that you're right. You can be there for them in whatever capacity that you can at that time. It's very interesting. Here at Eat Well, Live Well, Age Well, we talk a lot about what it means to age well. And we talk about facing life head on, without fear is what I always like to say. It's almost impossible to be fearless, but, we try. And preparation for old age really should begin when we're young. And you counsel people of all ages. Tell me a little bit about the approach you take and how it differs with the varying age groups that you encounter.
Yeah, it's a great question. There are differences at different ages. I mean, unfortunately, for better or for worse, it comes more naturally as people age. A lot of times when people are younger, we're trying to encourage them to think about these ultimate issues and things that everyone should be thinking about. I remember I once heard a rabbi say that everyone should have an advance directive from the time they have a driver's license. Because the sort of risk in life kind of increases at that point. And there are values that everyone has that they would want their loved ones to know about in case they can't speak for themselves. And we oftentimes, in our society, we don't think about it, let's say till age, a common time is around age 50, because there's certain, medical interventions that start at that, the routine checkups that happen then, sometimes much later, but really it should be earlier. And the younger someone is, the more invincible, they think they are. And so at the younger stages, we're trying to convince, not convince, that's not the word I would use, but encourage people that they should be thinking about these things, especially if they have, small children or people who are dependent on them. it's really the wise thing to do. We teach here at Cedars-Sinai a Jewish expectant parent workshop, and we tell all the expectant parents, you need to have a will now. Like you need to have advanced care planning and legal wills, ethical wills. So that's really important when people are younger. As they age, one thing that I find is that the fear is different. The fear is like, like we say in Hebrew, the ayin hara, like
Right.
someone thinks it's going to be like a bad omen if they talk about things. And end of life things. And what we encourage them is, there's a tradition, a Jewish mystical tradition, that if a person purchases their burial plot when they are alive and well, it's actually like a charm for longer life. They say in Hebrew, segula farichas yamim. They'll live longer, which obviously, I mean, you could do some research and study it. I doubt people who have a burial plot actually live longer than people who don't.
Yeah.
But I think what it means is that they appreciate every moment
Mm-hmm.
because they recognize that life is finite. And it also takes off a lot of guilt and stress from children. And when they have to make decisions and do planning, oftentimes death is not expected. And there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. And anything that we can do for our loved ones ahead of time can reduce much of that, that anxiety, that stress, and it will be appreciated eventually. And so with older patients, I'm often encouraging them, like, it's actually not a bad omen, it's a gift.
Right. It is interesting where people have very beliefs set in their ways. So one of the downside, I think, of because I work with aging as well, is people are very, very set in their ways and their beliefs, and it's hard to, not that you want to sway them, but it's hard to encourage them. It's a little bit more difficult to get them to come around because, even if they want to intellectually, emotionally, there's these stumbling blocks. I would think you need to get to the patient before they're in a crisis mode, right? You want to have these conversations before it's close or imminent, or something tragic happened recently and the family doesn't know what to do. But it's probably the exception that people are planning. So at what point do most patients call upon your help? Like when they get admitted, or when they're reaching a crisis decision, or the family needs you because the person passed away?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Mhm.
The truth is, everyone's different. So there are people that right when they get in the hospital, they ask for a rabbi or for a chaplain, and they want someone to talk to pray with. There's ritual concerns, or Shabbat or things like that.
Mhm.
Um, there are a high percentage seems to be either after a very bad diagnosis, or when death is either imminent or has just happened.
Mhm.
And it is a shame, you're right, because it would be better to prepare in advance and start talking about things and thinking through things ahead of time. And some people do, but most common, it's when the crisis is already here. But it's not too late. I wouldn't say it's too late. It's never too late. It's always right to reach out for support and try to have some guidance as we go through difficult times.
I hadn't planned on asking you this just because there's always a time constraint, but I do want to throw this out. Now we go in with this, and as healthcare professionals, as family members, and I'm sure the staff in the hospital, you wouldn't be there if you didn't care. This is just it's healthcare, and literally you're caring for people. Um, Talk to me a little bit about, okay, we have imminent danger or death, or we have a very serious diagnosis that needs immediate attention, or it is a terminal prognosis and it's just a matter of time. These cases are very, very unfortunate. What about, how do you help people deal with the right there, that moment, that day, that hour, that minute, separate from focusing on the fact that you need advance directives or you need a burial plot? That's, yeah, we're there.
Right.
That has to happen. But the actual day to day.
Yeah, good question. A major focus of chaplaincy and chaplain's role in the hospital is helping people find their own sources of strength, their own inner resilience. I recognize that I can't fix their problems, but they might have the resources to deal with what they're going through. And so I find that being a good listener, asking the right questions to help people find their own inner resources can, oftentimes just by having a chance to talk about our feelings and really articulate what we're going through, and talk it out and think it through, we sort of realize things that are inside us already, but we need the chance to talk it out. And so a lot of it's like really trying to work on being a good listener and sometimes focusing the conversation towards, I can give you an example of a patient. I remember once a patient was diagnosed with a horrible terminal illness, and it was going to be a long road ahead of fighting the illness and recovery, and didn't look that great. And I had never met him before, but he asked for a rabbi once he got this diagnosis, and I was sitting with him. And as I'm listening to him talk, and he's sharing with me how dire the situation is, at what point I asked him, "Have you ever experienced a challenge like this before in your life?" And he thought for a minute. He was quiet and thought, "Well, there is one challenge that I experienced. It was I for a number of years I was an alcoholic. I struggled with addiction, and it was a very difficult period in my life." And I said, "How did you overcome that? You're not you were an alcoholic. You used it in the past tense." He said, "Oh yeah, I went in. It was a number of bad years, and then I went into recovery, and I go to AA meetings on a regular basis, and I worked the 12 steps, and I did it. Like, I've been sober for decades now." And I sort of said to him, without fully even saying it, I said, "Wow, so those principles of the 12 steps in AA really gave you a lot of strength, didn't it?" And he got quiet, and he said, "Those principles, I need to work them now for this. I can do a lot of those same principles. I have the strength. I can manage this somehow. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk to my sponsor, and I'm going to work through this." And he all of a sudden got like this courage again. And it's not that I like convinced him or I healed him or something, or it was just helping him, trying to find those areas of inner resilience that many of us do have, but we have to be kind of reminded or remind ourselves.
That's a great story because, like I said, you couldn't control the outcome, nor could anybody for that matter, but you opened him up to really being in today. And that is critical for anything, good or bad, right?
Yeah.
And you're in a very unique position in healthcare. You are privy to a lot of things without being their doctor for obvious reasons. You're there and you're there to help, and people share, I'm sure, everything from A to Z with you. Can you advocate for a patient and receive sensitive medical information without being a relative or designated power of attorney? In other words, if the person needs to work through their particular condition, where do you draw the line on too much information
Yeah. It's a great question, actually. So chaplains do have access, in terms of chaplains have access to the electronic medical records.
Okay.
Obviously, HIPAA laws apply. So first of all, a chaplain cannot share that with anybody. And also a chaplain can't look into someone's healthcare details for unnecessary reasons. And the hospitals are very good at monitoring that and controlling that. And we have to be responsible not to dig into a patient's charts. We only as needed, and it's very sensitive. And so we really stay out of their medical records. There are some chaplains I know who feel that before they see a patient, they want to know some detail about what's happening. It kind of helps them prepare themselves and work with the patient. I personally, I like to know less because I want to be curious. I want to be a good listener. So the less I know, the more curious and the more, authentically curious I'm going to be to learn about them. I'm there to learn who they are and help them articulate. Of course, some minor details might be helpful. I mean, if a person's going in for a very routine procedure versus a person who, let's say, just lost a loved one, and then they themselves were diagnosed with a horrible, someone who's going through, obviously I want to know some basics because I'm going to have a little bit of a different attitude, kind of talking to someone who's there for a routine treatment versus someone who's really going through a lot. I'm not going to just kind of walk in and like be happy go lucky cheery with someone if that's not the emotion that kind of they're experiencing. So I like to know just the basics, general basics, but I personally don't dig into their charts, both because it's inappropriate and it's sensitive, and you could get into a lot of trouble for doing that if you did it inappropriately, but also because I think it makes one into a better listener when they don't know all the details.
Right. How do the doctors and other healthcare professionals respond to your presence?
It's a great question because there's such a wide gamut, meaning some doctors and healthcare professionals have an attitude where it's sort of like, okay, like it's very nice and cute that you're here, but like it's time, like you can get out of my way because the real professional's here now, and I'm the one who does the real interventions, and come back when no one else is here so that you can do your like hocus pocus stuff. But there is, of course, that attitude in the world of medicine and science that kind of belittles the whole person care, spiritual, mental health, emotional. But I personally find much more often tremendous respect. Oftentimes doctors and nurses will make comments to me like, thank you for what you do. We so appreciate what you do. We get referrals from them like, I'm not getting through to them, or my patient's really suffering. They need someone to talk to. There's a recognition that like we say in the Misha Berach, the prayer for healing, refuat hanefesh and refuat haguf. There's physical healing, but there's also emotional, spiritual, whole person healing. And actually in the Jewish prayer, we actually put the emotional, the spiritual healing first. And sometimes even when a person is dying, this is I heard from Rabbi Meir of blessed memory, sometimes even when there's no cure for a patient's illness, there could still be healing. Healing can happen in ways that are emotional, relational. Healing can still happen even when a cure can't happen. And sometimes there's no healthcare professional, no medical professional that can induce the healing once a cure is no longer possible. And that in those instances, our role becomes especially amplified. And I think the majority of healthcare professionals, from my experience, do recognize and appreciate that, just it's to varying degrees.
With us today is Dr. Rabbi Jason Weiner. He's the Senior Rabbi and Director of Spiritual Care Department at Cedars-Sinai's Medical Center in Los Angeles. And in my opinion, a very important addition to the healthcare team so that the patient's care is compassionate and that their wishes are heard. I want you to talk to us a little bit about, you brought this up about the healing, some of the issues you're faced with when you're called upon to counsel a patient. How do you manage the dynamics of family and friends kind of interfering with that? I'm sure you've encountered that.
It's a great question. It is a big issue because for some people, family and friends, that support is crucial, right? People can't do everything alone, especially when they're going through crisis. They need support, whether it's just, that emotional support or whether it's just, logistical support, picking up family members from, running errands, whatever it might be, advocating, kind of showing the hospital that this person is loved and cared for and that we're kind of watching, we're there, like there's all that. And it can be crucial. There are times when I find, on the other hand, that family members or friends can get a little bit over involved and the patient just wants to rest, or the nurses and the staff already have someone in the family who they're communicating with, and other people kind of becomes like too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. And I get it because it comes from a good place. People are like, my friend or family member is suffering, they're sick, they're in crisis, I need to help. And that is a beautiful emotion that comes from a great place. But sometimes it can be overbearing. And so, like the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch says, you can visit a patient even 100 times a day if that's what they want, but as long as that is not a burden on them. If we are being, a tircha, if we're bothering them, if we're burdening them, then it's negative. And so we have to be extra sensitive to seeing what the patient needs and providing those needs, but not kind of more than what they might need or want.
Rabbi Weiner, you're a specialist in bioethics and healthcare policy. And so what's your role at the hospital to ensure that things are being handled ethically?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So my primary role is in chaplaincy, is in spiritual care. That is the primary thing. I have a couple of roles when it comes to bioethics. One is when a Jewish patient, see, we have a team of healthcare ethicists, of bioethicists, full-time. That's what they do, and they do a great job of it, and that's their realm. And I don't want to step into their realm. The times when I can be helpful is when there are, let's say for me as a rabbi, and this is true for other chaplains in their traditions, if there's a Jewish patient who has specific Jewish needs that either culturally or religiously, they might be unique, and either they would rather speak to someone who they can relate to, or their concerns are based in Jewish law. So I can be that resource to either sort of translate their needs to the broader healthcare team and to our team of healthcare ethicists, or I can kind of help to provide that guidance on their specific questions, their concerns. And so I can be a Jewish resource, but one who's also kind of interacting and working as a go-between with the broader healthcare team. The other role is I'm on the bioethics committee, but that's a much larger committee. I have no kind of leadership role in that committee. I'm just one member, but my view on that committee is like, how can I advocate for the spiritual needs, the religious needs, cultural needs? So when we're coming up with policy or issues that arise that we need to discuss, I try to advocate on behalf of those who might come from a religious perspective to ensure that that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, so the Judaism and most religions are really based in ethics and being an ethical person.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you draw the line? Excuse my cough, we'll take that out.
Okay.
Where do you draw the line when a patient's decision doesn't match up with where you are religiously? You can opt out on this question, but I'm curious because I know according to Jewish law, we save a life almost at any cost.
It's a great question and a difficult question, and one that I struggle with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, not all patients are going to have my same religious commitments or values or conclusions or perspectives, and have every right to their own, worldview, as long as they're not hurting anyone else. And even though, yeah, I do have my own kind of opinions and perspectives, and even though I try to be flexible, there are things that are beyond those. But my role as a chaplain is to be supportive and compassionate to people, Basher Husham, as they are, where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it could be that there's certain actions that might be beyond what I am comfortable with ethically or religiously. And so my role then kind of changes to, I'm here to support you as a person, to not judge you or condemn you, but to be there for you as a person. I might not be able to facilitate or do certain things, but I can still be there for a person as their emotional and spiritual support. Sometimes they might have questions and want some guidance. And so I can gently provide guidance that might be towards a perspective or a worldview that I'm more comfortable with, but then it's their right and their obligation to choose what works for them. And so I'm just there as a resource, and there not to judge them, but to provide emotional, spiritual support, regardless of what they choose. And it could be different choices than what I would make. And so I might not do that action, as I'll be clear with them, but I can still be there for them as a human being and be compassionate and sensitive.
That's tremendous. I think that's you get an A+ beyond for that effort of understanding where you'd like it to go and the reality of there's always a reality in what the person's willing to do or not willing to do.
Right. Thank
you.
you.
Let me ask you if there's and if you stay out of this, I understand, but it's an interesting question to me that the patient's wishes differ from the family's wishes. And then when the patient passes, there's fighting, right? Do you dig your heels in and say to the family, it's not your decision, it's his or her decision what happens?
Yeah, that's a common scenario. You're right. So yes, usually we believe in something called substituted judgment, which is that the patient has the right to make decisions for themselves or what they would want for themselves, even if they're not currently able to speak or express their desires. We have to honor what they would want, not what we want for them. There are isolated incidents where, let's say someone dies and the family is having a massive struggle over something that they found out was in the patient's directive. Let's say sometimes there could be unique situations where the whole family is united in their perspective on what they would want to see. And we can make a reasonable assumption that if the patient would have known that their family would have been so upset by this decision that they would not have wanted it, sometimes we can say, okay, you know what, then let's make this decision that makes everyone happy. But in the vast majority of cases, the focus is simply, what would the patient want if they were here right now to speak for themselves? And that's what we have to honor.
I want to address, as we get towards closing, what I think is the most important aspect of facing the prospect of a life-threatening disease is what we started to talk about in the beginning, and when death is imminent, and that's having the advanced directives. So I want to send everybody to you because you have a fantastic booklet on it that you send out, and we'll post that information. But tell us what it is in a nutshell and why it's of the utmost importance.
Yeah, advanced directives are crucial because we have the amazing ability now thank God, thanks to medical science and intervention and technology, to prolong life in ways that we could not for all of human history until now. We can really prolong life, and it's a huge blessing and a beautiful thing. It does sometimes have the downside of prolonging life in ways that a patient is not able to speak for themselves and share their vision, their wishes, their goals, their values, their preferences, and but they might have them, and we want to respect who they are and what they would want for themselves. And it's at times, these life prolonging measures can also cause a tremendous amount of suffering. So it's not like they're value free. It's not like it's just like, okay, well, we'll just prolong life. What could be bad about that? We have to really know what the patient would want if we're going to actually inflict pain on them in order to prolong their life. And so the biggest gift that one can give, both if they want to follow their own values, their religious tradition, they want to honor their family by reducing stress and strife, they want to assist their healthcare team to provide that care that's in accordance with their own values and preferences. So sharing those wishes ahead of time is the way to do that. Now, there are many types of advance directives. Sometimes people just say, you know what, here's who I want you to talk to. I trust whatever they'll decide for me. That's a safe way to do it. There are some that give a number of lists of interventions. I wouldn't want, to be intubated. I would want artificial nutrition. I wouldn't want this. I wouldn't want resuscitation. I would want it to, and they can just list them. The challenge that's helpful too, but the challenge is that we don't always know what the situation is going to be. When we write our advance directive, we don't know what's going to be happening to us at that time. We don't know what medical interventions will be possible or won't be possible. So there's a lot of risk involved in that because it might not be relevant. And also it's hard to apply to different scenarios. And so the advance directive that we came up with at Cedars-Sinai, for example, we have a Jewish version of it as well, is more of a conversation primer, which is let us have a conversation to express our general healthcare values, wishes, preferences, the types of things that we value, things that we don't value. And once I have the opportunity both to share this with my loved ones, with my agent, with my rabbi, then they can use that to help make decisions on my behalf in more specific cases. But I'm not giving specific scenarios and specific directives. I'm giving a general picture of who I am with an eye on healthcare intervention so that decisions can be made for me in accordance with my own values. And we've found that to be an effective way for people to both have those conversations with their loved ones, which is a crucial conversations. It strengthens relationships, strengthens the person's own knowledge of who they are, and it helps a lot in these difficult moments of crisis.
So I want to share that I filled out those for our listeners. It was about 15 pages. I filled it out. I had it notarized right down to where the burial plot is. My great-grandfather in 1948 or 49 in New York bought a section of the cemetery with 24 plots. Oh. And so we all have a place to go now still. I'm saying it kind of funny, but the truth is it's all in there in my paperwork at Cedars, by the way. And I actually feel really good about that. I feel so good that, my family will not be, God forbid something were to happen, my family won't be scrambling. Yeah, and I want to share with everybody that's listening, if someone you love has been given a scary diagnosis, suffers from any kind of chronic illness, or is in need of some guidance, don't do it alone. Whatever religion you practice, whatever outlook you have, there's somebody there at your local facility. If it's not in the hospital, get a social worker, get somebody to help you. There's so much help out there. There's so much untapped resources for people that can help you through all this. And reaching out not just for you and for your family members when you need help is priceless. And this also goes for the family member. If your patient isn't interested or capable, you too can get help as a family member. I really like to reiterate that. Rabbi Dr. Jason Weiner, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to ask you, what do you like about getting older? I mean, you're relatively young, but I love to hear about where you're at as well.
That's a great question. I have noticed over the years, I have a lot of growing up to do still, but I have noticed like a certain kind of wisdom that comes with life experience. And it's precious, it's precious to be able to kind of learn from experience and kind of have a new perspective on things, see the world beyond oneself. I think as one gets older, they become hopefully a little bit less selfish and focus on kind of broader issues of meaning and purpose. And they can use some of that wisdom to try to have an impact on the world and teach the next generation. And I'm starting, as I get older, I'm starting to see that reality. And it gives me more respect for people older than myself, that there's wisdom with age and we should really respect our elders.
Our grandparents were right in a lot of ways, right? When you
Yeah,
look back at the
exactly.
things that they were telling you when you were little, you're like, oh, leave me alone. And then here you are later finding yourself doing the same things.
Yep.
Tell us where we can get your books again. And
Oh, that's so kind. Well, I have a website, rabbiweiner.com,
okay,
and
great.
they're listed there or on Amazon.
Okay, great. And I want to
Thank
thank
you.
all of you for listening to Eat Well, Live Well, Age Well. Please tune in to our shows for more ongoing discussions about health, wellness, and aging well. And for feedback or topic requests, or if you need some more information about Rabbi Weiner after listening to the show, you can email me at www.patriciagreenberg.com.